All right, so you want to explore inclusive leadership, right? And I get it, you're interested in going beyond just the label.
For sure.
That's fantastic, Gus. We've got a fascinating set of sources here.
Awesome.
Academic articles, business program descriptions, and even a piece from Psychology Today.
Wow, sounds interesting.
This is going to be a really insightful deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
It's great to see this curiosity because inclusive leadership is becoming more than just a buzzword.
Right.
It's a real shift in how organizations approach leadership for success.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Okay.
What exactly is inclusive leadership?
Right.
The Oxford Review defines it as prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI in every single aspect of leadership.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like on the ground?
So that's the key question. It's
Yeah.
more than just ticking boxes.
Right.
The Harvard DCE program description really highlights this.
Okay.
They emphasize that embracing diversity, promoting equity, and fostering inclusion are actually strategies for better performance and innovation.
It's interesting. So it's not just about doing the right thing.
Right.
It's about creating a more successful and dynamic work environment.
Exactly. And the Oxford Review provides a concrete example of a multinational corporation in London that put these principles into practice.
Okay.
They went beyond just talking about DEI.
Uh-huh.
They implemented mandatory training for all their managers, established clear practices to recruit a diverse workforce,
Wow.
and even set up employee resource groups to foster a sense of belonging.
Hold on, employee resource groups.
Yeah.
What are those exactly?
So they're voluntary groups,
Okay.
led by employees who share a common identity or interest,
Okay.
like women in leadership, LGBTQ plus employees, or people with disabilities.
Got it.
They provide a space for connection, support, and advocacy within the organization.
That makes a lot of sense. It's
Yeah.
about creating a space where everyone feels seen and heard, not just tolerated.
Precisely. And that ties directly into the 7 strategies for inclusive leaders. Oh, interesting.
That we see outlined in the Psychology Today article.
Ooh, I love lists.
Yeah.
What are those strategies? Do any of them stand out to you as particularly important?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Creating a culture of belonging
Yeah.
is at the heart of many of these strategies.
Okay.
One that I find fascinating is strength-based leadership.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
It's about recognizing and leveraging the unique strengths of each individual rather than trying to fit them into a predetermined mold.
I can see how that goes beyond just labeling someone based on their role or background.
Right.
It's about seeing their potential and creating opportunities for them to shine.
Instead of focusing on what people lack,
Yeah.
you're focusing on what they bring to the table.
Right.
And it's not just about assigning tasks based on strengths.
Okay.
It's also about how you provide feedback,
Yeah.
how you encourage growth, and how you create a sense of empowerment within your team.
That makes me think of the strategy they list called humanizing the workplace.
It seems so simple, but the impact can be profound.
Right.
Things like remembering personal details, encouraging people to share non-work interests.
Yeah.
It all contributes to creating a sense of connection and belonging.
It's all about fostering a sense of humanity.
Yeah.
The Psychology Today article even brings up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, reminding us that belonging is a fundamental human need,
Right.
just like food and shelter.
Makes sense.
When we feel a sense of belonging, we're more likely to be engaged, productive, and fulfilled in our work.
That makes me think about those employee resource groups we were talking about.
Yes.
These seem like a really practical way to foster that sense of belonging and connection,
Yeah.
especially in larger organizations.
Absolutely. And another strategy that's crucial in today's workplace
Yeah.
is flexibility.
I like that one.
Inclusive leaders understand that people have lives outside of work and are willing to adapt to individual needs and circumstances.
Yeah, things like flexible work schedules, remote work options, and simply being understanding of personal commitments can make a huge difference
Right.
in creating a supportive and inclusive environment.
Exactly. And the great thing about these strategies
Yeah.
is that they're not mutually exclusive. They can all work together to create a truly inclusive workplace where everyone feels valued and empowered to contribute their best.
Okay, so we've got this great foundation for understanding inclusive leadership.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that you're interested in going beyond just the label of inclusive leadership.
Yes.
How do we actually do that? So where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And to really understand it, I think we need to dive into that dense academic article you have.
Okay.
The one that explores the link between inclusive leadership and innovative performance.
Oh, let's do it. Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Let's go.
And see what the research tells us about how inclusive leadership actually plays out in the real world.
And the best part, this research reveals a key element that goes beyond just a definition.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Psychological safety.
Ooh, psychological safety. What is it?
Yeah.
And why is it so important?
Imagine an environment where you feel completely comfortable speaking up, sharing your ideas, even admitting mistakes without fear of judgment or negative consequences.
Okay.
That's psychological safety in a nutshell.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But does that really exist?
Well,
And how does it connect to inclusive leadership?
what's fascinating is that the research clearly shows that psychological safety is a key ingredient for innovation,
Okay.
both at the individual and team level.
Interesting.
And guess what? Inclusive leaders play a massive role in creating that sense of safety.
So it's not just about being nice or avoiding conflict.
No.
It's about fostering an environment where people feel empowered to take risks, to be creative, and to challenge the status quo.
Precisely. And this article uncovers something truly remarkable. There's actually a cross-level influence at play. It's not just about the leader's direct interactions with each team member. The overall climate they create at the team level can actually impact individual psychological safety.
Wow.
And as a result, individual innovation.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So even if a leader interacts with me one-on-one in a very inclusive way,
Right.
if the overall team culture isn't psychologically safe,
Yeah.
it can still hold me back from being my most innovative self.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that inclusive leadership is about much more than just individual action. It's about creating a systemic culture of inclusion that permeates the entire team.
Okay, so we've got this concept of psychological safety, which seems incredibly important for fostering innovation.
For sure.
But let's not forget about that initial question about moving beyond labeling.
Right.
How does all of this connect to that idea?
That's where we can bring in some insights from sociology.
Yeah.
Labeling theory emphasizes how societal reactions can shape individuals' identities and unfortunately contribute to negative outcomes.
Right.
It highlights how stereotypes, biases, and prejudice can really impact people's lives.
So even if we don't intend to discriminate, the labels we use, consciously or unconsciously, can have a real impact on how people see themselves and how they're treated by others.
Exactly. And this is where inclusive leadership becomes so powerful by focusing on individual strengths, fostering a sense of belonging, and creating that psychological safety we were just talking about. Inclusive leaders can actually help counteract the harmful effects of labeling.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about creating an environment where people feel valued for who they are,
Yes.
not limited by how they're labeled.
And the Psychology Today article really drives this point home.
Okay.
They highlight how creating a sense of belonging
Yeah.
is absolutely key for employee retention and engagement.
We all want to feel like we belong.
Right.
Like we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we feel that way at work,
Yeah.
it makes a huge difference in our motivation, our productivity, and our overall well-being.
Absolutely. And inclusive leaders are deliberate about creating that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
They don't just hope it will happen organically.
Right.
They actively use those 7 strategies we discussed to cultivate it within their teams.
That reminds me of a time when I was managing a team,
Uh-oh.
and there was this sense of everyone working in silos.
Okay.
We were all very professional and got our work done, but there was no real sense of community.
Right.
So I decided to take matters into my own hands.
Okay.
Well, it was pretty simple, really.
All right.
I started a weekly team lunch.
Oh, fun.
Nothing fancy.
Okay.
We just picked a different spot each week and all went out together.
I like it.
At first, people were hesitant,
Yeah.
but then someone shared a funny story about their weekend. Someone else chimed in with a similar experience, and the conversation just took off.
Awesome.
Absolutely. We started celebrating birthdays, talking about our lives outside of work,
Nice.
even just venting about annoying commutes.
Yeah.
It became this ritual that built genuine connection.
I love that.
People were more engaged, more willing to help each other out, and the overall mood was so much more positive.
You intuitively created that space for belonging that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about being nice.
Right.
It was about actively cultivating connection.
And it wasn't just about socializing either.
Oh,
It made our work better.
How so?
People felt more comfortable sharing ideas, brainstorming, even disagreeing respectfully, because we'd built that foundation of trust and connection.
It seems like you tapped into some core principles of inclusive leadership,
Yeah.
even without having the formal framework.
Right.
This perfectly illustrates how fostering connection strengthens a team's performance.
I'm curious, how do you see this idea of moving beyond labels playing out in real-world leadership?
I think it's about recognizing that labels, while sometimes necessary,
Yeah.
can also be incredibly limiting.
Right.
Inclusive leaders see beyond those labels
Uh-huh.
and recognize the unique value that each individual brings to the table.
So instead of thinking, this is the marketing person or that's the
Yes.
finance guy,
Exactly.
an inclusive leader sees them as Sarah, who has a knack for visual storytelling, and David, who is incredibly analytical and detail-oriented.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that everyone has a story, everyone has strengths,
Yeah.
and everyone deserves to be seen and valued for who they truly are,
Right.
not just for the label they've been assigned.
That makes me think back to the Strategies in the Psychology Today article.
Yeah.
Wouldn't strength-based leadership be a key way to move beyond those limiting labels?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our focus from identifying weaknesses to recognizing and leveraging strengths.
Right.
When you lead from that perspective, you're not trying to fit people into predefined boxes. You're creating opportunities for them to shine in their own unique ways.
That sounds incredibly empowering,
It is.
both for the individual and for the team as a whole.
Absolutely.
Could you give some specific examples of what strength-based leadership might look like in practice?
Absolutely. Let's say you have a team member who's amazing at brainstorming and coming up with creative ideas,
Okay.
but they struggle with following through on those ideas and getting things done. Instead of labeling them as scattered or unreliable,
Right.
a strength-based leader might pair them with someone who excels at planning and execution.
So you create this dynamic duo where each person's strengths complement the other.
Exactly.
And the team as a whole benefits from that synergy.
Precisely. Or imagine you have someone who is a whiz with data analysis
Okay.
but gets nervous speaking in front of large groups.
Got it.
A strength-based leader would recognize those strengths and limitations and perhaps assign them to a role where they can contribute their analytical skills without being forced into uncomfortable situations.
It seems like a lot of it comes down to observation and communication.
It does.
Really taking the time to understand each individual's strengths, interests, and even their anxieties.
It's about having those conversations, asking questions, and being genuinely curious about what makes each person tick.
Yeah.
And then it's about using that knowledge to create opportunities for them to succeed.
You know, this whole conversation is making me realize that inclusive leadership is really about fostering a sense of belonging at its core.
I agree.
When people feel like they belong, like their strengths are valued and their voices are heard,
Yeah,
it unleashes so much potential both individually and collectively.
I couldn't agree more. It's about creating that sense of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable being themselves, taking risks and contributing their best work.
And it all circles back to going beyond labels.
Right.
It's about seeing the human being behind the job title, the personality behind the performance review,
Yeah.
the potential beyond the perceived limitations.
Yeah, that's beautifully put.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of each individual
I love that.
and creating an environment where that worth is celebrated and nurtured.
So we've covered a lot of ground here,
Yeah.
from defining inclusive leadership to understanding its impact on innovation and performance.
For sure.
But we haven't touched much on the challenges of putting these principles into practice.
Sure.
What are some of the obstacles that leaders might face
Huh.
when trying to create a more inclusive environment?
That's an important question, and it's something that we need to address head on.
Okay.
One of the biggest challenges is unconscious bias.
Oh yeah, unconscious bias.
We all have biases, even if we're not aware of them.
Right.
And these biases can impact how we perceive and interact with others.
So even if we have the best of intentions, our unconscious biases can still create barriers to inclusion
Yes.
without us even realizing it.
It's like those blind spots we have when we're driving. They're there even if we can't see them.
Right.
And they can lead to us making decisions or taking actions that perpetuate inequality and exclusion.
So how do we address those blind spots?
Well,
How do we mitigate the impact of unconscious bias in our leadership?
awareness is the first step.
Okay.
We need to educate ourselves about unconscious bias, understand how it manifests in the workplace,
Right.
and be willing to confront our own biases.
Okay.
There are some great tools and resources available,
Like
the implicit association test developed by Harvard University,
oh yeah, I've heard of that one.
that can help us become more aware of our own unconscious biases.
That's a great resource. And once we've become more aware of our biases, what can we do to actually change our behaviors?
It's about being intentional and putting structures in place
Okay.
that help us mitigate the impact of those biases.
Okay.
For example, we can implement blind recruitment processes,
Okay.
where we remove identifying information like names and gender from resumes
Right.
to minimize the influence of unconscious bias in hiring decisions.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
And it sounds like something that could be relatively easy to implement.
it is.
What are some other practical strategies?
We can also use objective criteria for performance evaluations and promotions,
Okay.
rather than relying on subjective judgments that can be influenced by bias.
Got it.
We can create diverse hiring panels to ensure that a range of perspectives are represented in the selection process.
Right.
And we can provide training on unconscious bias for all employees, not just leaders,
Yeah.
to raise awareness and create a shared understanding of the issue.
It sounds like it's about creating a culture of awareness and accountability,
It is.
where everyone is responsible for identifying and addressing bias, both in themselves and in others.
Exactly. And it's not just about policies and procedures. It's
Right.
also about fostering a climate of psychological safety where people feel comfortable speaking up if they witness or experience bias
Right.
without fear of retribution.
You're right. If people don't feel safe to speak up, then those biases will just continue to operate unchecked.
Exactly. And that's where inclusive leadership becomes so crucial.
Yeah.
Inclusive leaders create that space for open dialogue where people feel empowered to challenge bias and advocate for fairness and equity.
This makes me think about something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
The idea that inclusive leadership is a journey, not a destination.
right.
It's not something you achieve overnight. It's an ongoing process of learning, unlearning, and relearning.
It absolutely is.
Uh-huh.
And it requires us to be humble, to be open to feedback,
Yeah.
and to be willing to make mistakes along the way.
Speaking of making mistakes,
Uh-oh.
I'm remembering a time when I really messed up.
Oh, no.
I was leading a team project,
Okay.
and I got so focused on meeting deadlines and achieving our goals
Yeah.
that I completely overlooked the needs of one of my team members.
Oh, what happened? How did you realize you'd overlooked your team members' needs?
Well, this team member was going through a really tough time personally, and I was so caught up in the project that I didn't even notice. I was pushing everyone hard to meet deadlines,
Right.
and I wasn't paying attention to the signs that this person was struggling.
It's easy to get laser focused on the task at hand and miss those subtle cues,
Yeah,
especially when we're under pressure.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it until it was almost too late.
Oh, no.
This team member finally broke down in tears during a meeting,
Oh, wow.
and I felt terrible. I realized that I'd failed them as a leader.
That must have been a difficult moment. What did you do?
I took some time to reflect on what had happened,
Okay.
and I realized that I needed to make some changes. I apologized to the team member,
Right?
and I made a commitment to be more mindful of their needs and the needs of the team as a whole.
So you turned a mistake into an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
Both for yourself and for the team.
I hope so. It was a valuable lesson in the importance of empathy communication.
Yeah.
And creating a supportive environment where people feel comfortable speaking up when they're struggling.
It's a powerful reminder that inclusive leadership isn't just about celebrating successes.
Okay.
It's also about being there for people during challenging times.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that everyone has different needs and experiences.
Yeah.
And what works for one person might not work for another.
That's where those strategies we discussed earlier become so important. Things like flexibility, strength-based leadership, and humanizing the workplace.
Yeah.
They all contribute to creating an environment where everyone feels supported and valued, no matter what they're going through.
It's about creating that sense of psychological safety we were talking about.
Exactly.
Where people feel comfortable being vulnerable and asking for help when they need it.
And it's also about recognizing that we don't have to have all the answers.
Right.
It's okay to ask for help, to lean on others, and to admit when we've made a mistake.
You know, this entire deep dive has been incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of what inclusive leadership really means beyond just the label.
It's been a fantastic conversation. We've explored so much.
We have.
From the theoretical foundations of inclusive leadership
Right.
to the practical strategies for putting it into practice.
And we've talked about the importance of psychological safety, strength-based leadership, and creating a culture of belonging where everyone feels valued and respected.
And we've acknowledged that it's an ongoing journey,
Yeah.
a journey that requires us to be intentional, to be humble, and to be constantly learning and growing.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into inclusive leadership, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with?
I would say this: if you're looking for a way to be a more effective and impactful leader, to create a more engaged and productive team, and to make a positive difference in the world, embrace inclusive leadership. It's not a quick fix, it's not a magic bullet, but it's a powerful approach to leadership that can transform your life and the lives of those around you.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we all make mistakes. It's how we learn and grow from them that truly matters.
Well, this team member was going through a really tough time personally, and I was so caught up in the project that I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
I was pushing everyone hard to meet deadlines, and I wasn't paying attention to the signs that this person was struggling.
It's so easy to get laser focused on the task at hand,
Right.
and miss those subtle cues, especially when we're under pressure.
Exactly. And I didn't realize it until it was almost too late. This team member finally broke down in tears during a meeting,
Yeah.
and I felt terrible.
Oh, gosh.
I realized that I had failed them as a leader.
That must have been a difficult moment.
Yeah.
What did you do?
I took some time to reflect on what had happened,
Okay.
and I realized that I needed to make some changes. I apologized to the team member, and I made a commitment to be more mindful of their needs and the needs of the team as a whole.
So you turned a mistake into an opportunity for growth, both for yourself and for the team.
I hope so. It was a valuable lesson in the importance of empathy communication and creating a supportive environment where people feel comfortable speaking up when they're struggling.
It's a powerful reminder that inclusive leadership isn't just about celebrating successes, it's also about being there for people during challenging times.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that everyone has different needs and experiences, and what works for one person might not work for another.
That's where those strategies we discussed earlier become so important.
Right.
Things like flexibility, strength-based leadership, and humanizing the workplace.
Yeah.
They all contribute to creating an environment where everyone feels supported and valued no matter what they're going through.
It's about creating that sense of psychological safety we were talking about, where people feel comfortable being vulnerable and asking for help when they need it.
Exactly. And it's also about recognizing that we don't have to have all the answers. It's okay to ask for help, to lean on others, and to admit when we've made a mistake.
This entire deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of what inclusive leadership really means, beyond just the label.
It's been a fantastic conversation. We've explored so much, from the theoretical foundations of inclusive leadership to the practical strategies for putting it into practice.
And we've talked about the importance of psychological safety, strength-based leadership, and creating a culture of belonging where everyone feels valued and respected.
And we've acknowledged that it's an ongoing journey, a journey that requires us to be intentional, to be humble, and to be constantly learning and growing.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into inclusive leadership, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
If you're looking for a way to be a more effective and impactful leader, to create a more engaged and productive team, and to make a positive difference in the world, embrace inclusive leadership. It's not a quick fix, it's not a magic bullet, but it's a powerful approach to leadership that can transform your life and the lives of those around you.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.